Welcome to a ride on the outside. MMA is full of people on the inside, but what about the ones that watch from beyond? Welcome to the MMA Outsiders with Tom Albano and Zain Bando on the Empty the Bench Podcast Network.
Welcome to episode 51 of the MMA Outsiders. Tom Albano here, along with Zain Bando, as always. And Zain, I think we need to rename our show. I think we need to rename our show to The Sugar Show, because that's going to be most of what we talk about today. UFC 292. Was it the most spectacular card? No, but Sean O'Malley. Well, you know what, Zain? The UFC banked on Sean O'Malley being a big star, and he's now delivered on that, becoming the new UFC bantamweight champion. Plus, Weili Zhang putting in a dominant performance. We'll talk about all that. We've got the PFL playoffs. They had one New York City card. They have another today, actually, later today. And then there's the whole Conor and Chandler stuff, which is a heavy disappointment. So, Zain, how are you?
I'm doing well, Tom. It's crazy to think that we're almost in September, which is probably one of the, as you and I both know, watching this sport for a long time, that the fall is usually one of those ones where once we hit week one of the fall, we think, oh, this is going to go by really slow, and then it ends up going really fast. So I'm just mentally preparing myself for the madness that is going to be September through the end of November. How about you,
Zain? You knowing my outside MMA profession, you know I'm very sad about September coming around. But September does bring out all the best. You know, they have all these fight hypes. We got Abu Dhabi coming up in October. We got the Garden coming up in November. We got a couple of big boxing fights along the way. So, yeah, hopefully this is one that goes by pretty quick with all the exciting action. And of course, there's football on the side, but obviously that's not here or there with MMA. But before we get started into anything, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you get notified of everything here at the Empty the Bench Network, including every episode of the MMA Outsiders. To my right, as always, is Zain Bando, my co-host. You can find his work over at bjpen.com, and he's a member of the Bellator Rankings Committee. So you can follow him also at ZanBando99 across social media. And then on Tom Albano, you can find my work over at Fansided MMA, as well as with the PFL for the fight recaps for every event for the 2023 season. You can follow me on social media at Thomas J. Albano. All right. And also, those of you who are listening on Acast, by the way, in our audio-only platforms, make sure to check out the video feed on our YouTube channel. Just past 500 subscribers. Those of you watching on YouTube, we thank you for your support, and make sure to follow us on the audio-only platforms as well. Okay, now we're ready to go into the story. So, Zain, obviously most of what we'll talk about today is UFC 292, the upcoming card in Singapore, the two PFL playoff cards with New York City. But we would be remiss if, Zain, we did not mention the elephant in the room, which is we gave that deadline. We said they got to announce something by UFC 292. And then the day of UFC 292, an interview drops with Dana White. It wasn't with the UFC. It was another platform. And ultimately, Zain, Dana White says that Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler will not happen in December at UFC 296. The plan, according to Dana White, is for early 2024. Now, this also brought about a response from McGregor very recently on social media in a series of voice tweets where he basically said that he wants the fight with Chandler to happen in December, but basically they aren't letting him, without giving a clear indication as to who the they are, whether it's a UFC or USADA. I'm speculating, Zain, has that thought that we didn't think was going to happen because it's Conor McGregor actually happened and USADA rejected an exemption for him?
Yeah, that would be my guess, considering if you listen to the voice tweets carefully, he mentions Bob Bennett, who obviously is a fixture in the Nevada State Athletic Commission, and I feel like partially the reason for it is a USADA issue and not a UFC issue. But my theory, and it's been said by other content creators and MMA media people in the space, that I think the UFC has been so silent about this fight is because this is just my speculation. I don't know this for a fact, but based on the information that I've gathered, it seems to me like there's some sort of non-disclosure agreement where the UFC cannot say certain things surrounding this fight, which is why every single time we hear an update on the fight, we hear the same answer over and over and over again because they can't get to the crux, the real reason why this fight isn't happening. And I really do think, just based on what Conor was talking about, that it has to be a USADA issue and not a UFC issue. Because I think this fight's been signed for a while, either verbally or pen to paper. I think it's more so just been the other stuff, the logistics around it, et cetera, et cetera. And in fact, we were kind of talking off the air before we came on, at the time we're recording this, and we were talking about how, this fight not happening in December could end up being a blessing in disguise for the promotion, considering that the upcoming Super Bowl is going to be in Las Vegas in February. And Dana had hinted at last year's Radio Row, just briefly, that he was targeting holding a UFC pay per view in Vegas for Super Bowl weekend, which would make McGregor versus Chandler, assuming that they're still working on that fight, a perfect backdrop for February. So even though this fight is being delayed, it might end up being a blessing in disguise for everyone involved.
Now, the only issue I see to that, Sam, it's already August, the day this comes out, August 23rd. So Super Bowl weekend would be a little less than 6 months away. If USADA has rejected an exemption for McGregor for a December fight, I don't know if they're going to approve something for Super Bowl weekend if it's going to be if it's not going to reach the 6 month, especially if it's not going to reach the 6 months.
Yeah, so I guess to piggyback off that point, if you're the UFC and you have to move on, just taking a hypothetical, let's assume that this fight just can't happen. Logistically, they've tried everything. The fight can't happen. How do you move forward at this fight? And if so, what would be next for both guys in your opinion? Just realistically, assuming that this fight doesn't come to fruition the way we think it's going to.
See, here's the thing with Chandler, and that if that happens, Chandler may have to play a little bit of a waiting game, only because I don't know. Obviously, we got a number of young up and comers with the lightweight division, those who are making their rise towards the top of the ranks. Like the first name to come off my head is a Fiziev, but I don't know if you necessarily can give that kind of fight to a Chandler. I don't know how you can't give Chandler a big name next because, as much as we talk about Conor McGregor not being involved in the title picture, not having won a meaningful fight since November of 2016, he's still one of the top names in the sport because of all he's done. So, as much as Chandler's also coming off, I want to say he's coming off a loss. I don't know how you do this I don't know how you just go from, hey, you were going to fight Conor McGregor and now you're going to fight some guy where if you lose, all of a sudden you take a hit down to like 7 to 10 in the lightweight rankings. I just don't know how that's possible. I feel like you got to give Chandler somebody in like the top 3 if you can't give McGregor.
Okay, and I guess the follow up to that would be: do you believe Dana when he said on that very podcast where he revealed that this fight would not be taking place in 2023? Do you believe Dana when he says that you have an Ultimate Fighter season, you have the two coaches compete against one another and they don't fight? He called it, in his words, ridiculous. Do you agree with him when he says that it would be?
100%. Zan, what if I said that if this fight doesn't come to fruition, especially it not happening in this year, then Tough 31, especially with the way it played out, was an absolute waste. I mean, you already had, just how bad the whole prospects versus veterans format ended up playing out. You talk about how, we've talked about on Tough Enough how basically the whole season was just it seemed like a whole thing just to, the Conor show, basically, as we're getting ready for a Conor McGregor comeback, supposedly. And now this fight ends up not happening. It definitely, at least not in 2023, and we don't know when it would happen in early 2024. Season 31 of Tough Zan was just a waste, and I think even you alluded to it when we were talking about the most overhyped and disappointing season in Tough history, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, when was the last time, Tom, that you watched a tough season and didn't know when the two coaches were going to fight? The answer is never.
I mean, obviously we have some exceptions, like McGregor and Faber were never going to fight.
Right, but that was what I'm saying is minus that rare exception. Every single coach's fight that's ever taken place, we knew when the fight was going to be. This is the only one where we simply didn't know, which is what made it super unique and very bizarre.
And by that stretch, very disappointing.
And to hear Dana say that it was a great season, I'm not sure if I'd buy that, but yeah.
Yeah, like I said on our last show of Tough Enough, I think that Dana and company need to basically go back to the drawing board and consider if tough is, should even still be a thing in, well, obviously the 2023 season happened, but in 2024, especially when we talked about, the connection to reality television, where, tough came during a time where reality television was the next big thing. And, people were so invested in it in 2005. And now it's 20 years later. And now, I mean, Zan, you look at like the Contender Series, and you see all the stars that come. We're going to be talking about Sean O'Malley, who came from the Contender Series. Now, Zan, 2 UFC champions have come out of the Contender Series. So I don't want to give Tough any disrespect, because Tough brought us plenty of UFC champions and Hall of Famers as well. But is the Contender Series more, I guess, relevant for the kind of era that we are in mixed martial arts?
I would argue the answer is yes. I mean, you look at every Tuesday night, it's live fights. You don't know what to expect. And the fights are pretty much always entertaining. And for those who follow the sport closely, you already know some of the names that are going to be competing on these shows just because they've been on Fight Pass in the past and whatever. So you already have some sort of a connection to all of these fighters going into it. Whereas with the Ultimate Fighter, you have to wait every single week to know what's going to happen next. The Contender Series, you can find the next crop of talent in 2 hours and 45 minutes every single Tuesday for 10 weeks in a row in the fall and move on with your evening. So I think the Contender Series is good for the modern day crowd. It's good for the crowd kind of like me in the Gen Z era, where my generation has short attention spans. And it was actually interesting. I was reading a Nielsen study the other day, and one of the top sports for Gen Zers with short form content is mixed martial arts, for the sole purpose that these fights can be repurposed into 30-second clips, and you don't have to watch the entire fight if you don't have a means to. And I think the Contender Series fits the newer generation, whereas Tough, you have to be a part of a bit of an older generation to fully understand the reality TV aspect. And I'm kind of tired of the show, honestly. I mean, I was hoping for more house drama with this season, and that really didn't happen until the end of it. But yeah, I mean, it just feels like every year it feels like it's the same repetitive thing over and over and over again, and there's no substance, there's no change. The only crazy show format was the prospects versus veterans, which you had alluded to a few minutes ago didn't work, and I agree with you. And I don't know, I just think the UFC's kind of moved on, and I think the Contender Series and the road to the UFC and looking for a fight and all of these other mini shows that they have is a better way to produce talent today than maybe it would have in 2005. In 2005, it made sense because you didn't have a huge crop of talent. You didn't have a huge roster. There were multiple MMA promotions gunning for the UFC, to where you needed reality TV to gain exposure to the sport. And now, with the sport being its own running machine, I don't think you need that as much anymore.
Plus, you add in the fact, Xanda, you talk about just how formatted Tough has become and a lack of house drama. I feel like, as you kind of alluded to with Gen Z and the younger generations, you talk about repurposing fights that, hey, you don't have to watch every single minute of every single fight. You can just get the main stuff. I mean, Zan, look, Sean O'Malley's clip was already purchased. I mean, was already uploaded to YouTube. You didn't even have to purchase the pay-per-view to see the finish, because of how they're trying to market O'Malley for this next generation of mixed martial arts. And you add the lack of house drama. I think, Zan, sometimes that house drama with the reality TV aspect lured in, you know, like the younger, I guess, would be my generation, and the older would be your Gen X's too, watching Tough and getting that exposure to the UFC. So it's like the modern Tough format is alienating all of the audience.
Oh, for sure. And I just think with the essence of streaming and the essence of more people, ditching cable for, OTA and just streaming boxes and whatever, people want to be able to binge watch things. And The Ultimate Fighter has never been a show where the whole season is posted and you can watch every episode at your leisure. You have to wait every single week. Whereas with Contender Series, you can tune in whenever you want. You can rewind and fast forward to any individual fight that you want, and then it's up instantaneously if you miss it. And I think it draws more eyeballs to the younger crowd because people want things with immediacy and they want it right away.
And I think, Zan, the issue you have with binging that I'm just thinking about now is, think about it. We're MMA media people. You know that the minute it gets released, the MMA media people, they're going to watch it all very quickly, and then within a few hours, it's going to be revealed who's going to be fighting in the finale anyway, which is going to kind of ruin the purpose of watching the show.
Yeah, given the way we do things in that space, yeah, you're not wrong. Mm-hmm.
So, like you said, maybe maybe Tough has become passe at this point.
It could very well be. I mean, I think the formula that you need for Tough is you need two coaches with a backstory, which I'm not saying McGregor and Chandler didn't have that, but I'd say the ingredients is you need a backstory, you need relatively good up and comers, and you need tension in the house. If you don't have those three things, then you don't have a successful recipe for success. Or excuse me, not a successful recipe for success. You don't have the correct formula for a successful season, and I think that's what they're missing. And truly, I just think it's gotten so out of touch, and now there's more, emphasis on power slap now that I feel like Tough is not getting the same treatment that it once did. They're now like branching off and doing other things. To where I just think if you want to sign prospects, you need to do it in a median format. I think Contender Series fits it. What I think we're going to eventually see, Tom, is there's so many fighters that there's no way, no how that the UFC can do Contender Series once a year. You're gonna see a year where the UFC will try everything in their power to make Contender Series either a year-round thing or a multi-year thing, just because now we're out of COVID and now more fighters want to be into the promotion. I think you could very well see a scenario where the Contender Series is shown multiple times over a course of a single year.
I could totally see a spring season and a fall season.
You could? Okay.
Yeah.
Which actually might even be better for the show anyway, considering how much the UFC loves it. So I'd be on for that. It would make Tuesdays a normal routine. So yeah, almost like a pro sports season in a sense. So yeah.
All right, moving on from that, San, I want to also make mention of a recent headline that kind of caught my attention because it's the only other thing we're going to do before we get into the recaps and previews. Colby Covington, basically the rumor had been, and we even talked about that UFC 295 Madison Square Garden, you would have Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic heavyweight title fight as the main event, and then maybe Leon versus Colby for the welterweight title as your co-main. According to Colby Covington, and I saw this coming courtesy of MMA Junkie, apparently that is not going to happen. And Colby is pointing the finger at his old friend Jon Jones and basically saying that it's Jon Jones who doesn't want him on the UFC 295 card. And then, I mean, fair or foul, because I could totally see Jones only doing this because we talked about how Jones Stipe, this could be the retirement fight for either of them. And I guess maybe he's concerned that Colby and the way that he is at press conferences and his, character of, I guess character is the best word for his in cage appearances might cause a bit of a stir because Colby would bring up Jon Jones's criminal history.
Yeah, and he would probably make fun of them going back to their days as collegiate roommates too.
Yeah.
I'm sure that it would get ugly really fast, and although it might end up being one of the most entertaining press conferences of all time, which we would lose out on. Unfortunately, it would be like a top 5 UFC press conference ever. I think it makes sense from the champion's perspective that he wouldn't want a distraction like Colby Covington on the card, just considering how big the heavyweight title fight is, and they want to reserve that as much as they can. So it makes total sense.
Also, I totally see this. I also can totally see this, and in the perspective of, well, you know what? We talked about, months ago when we started to have our doubts about Conor and Chandler. We're like, oh, are they going to move Jones Stipe off of the Garden then to Las Vegas? But now, come to think of it, with this story coming out, if it's true, Conor and Chandler isn't going to happen. Is there a chance? And they even talked about it on the pay-per-view. Is there a chance? Does that mean Leon Colby as either a main or a co-main for 296 in Vegas?
It could very well be possible. And I know you don't want to hear it, but I have to ask this question anyway. If somehow, some way, Jon Jones or Stipe Miocic pulls out of this fight, what does the UFC do?
I mean, they said they were going to announce a 295 co-main event soon. I feel like they got to at some point.
Well, yeah, I mean, and it could have very well been Colby Covington versus Leon Edwards until Colby Covington said that. So,
and then the thought process was going to be Stephen Thompson versus Kamaru Usman, but then Ian Gary wins his fight, has the call out of Thompson, and now you got Dana claiming that he immediately called Thompson. Thompson turned down the fight. So I don't know whether to believe that or not fully, knowing that it's Dana, but this is putting 295 in a questionable situation. Zain, I would assume, even though it's Jones Stipe and you want to run that fight, I feel like for 295 you're going to have to get Pavlovich as the backup fighter.
Which would be disappointing, and for sure would make the tickets a little bit less expensive, if you will, if that
maybe some of us can afford to go then.
Yeah, if that happened. For those of you who are thinking of getting tickets currently on the market right now, the cheapest ticket that you can buy is $552. The most expensive ticket is north of about $14,000. So it's this FYI for those who are waiting it out and hoping for a catastrophe to happen. You still have a couple more months to wait, because knowing what happens when a big Jon Jones fight gets announced, you know that there's always going to be a situation, and I'm just mentally preparing myself that somehow, some way, the fight does not happen. So
stay off the weed.
Do you in all likelihood actually think that Jon Jones some way does not make it to Madison Square Garden in November?
I'm going to hold out hope. Zain, think about the concept of this fight. Jon Jones, Stipe Miocic, two of the greatest of all time, one at heavyweight, one just of all time, period, now that he's conquered 2 weight classes. And both of them potentially could be retiring after this fight. This is a fight that has to absolutely happen. You're going to need Pavlovich because, like I said, if you're not going to have another championship fight for the Garden, you need something. You need at least an interim heavyweight title fight then. But, or at least having Pavlovich challenge Jones too, because I know people have talked about that, even though Stipe is the guy at this point.
I could very well see a scenario where if Jones somehow pulls out, they make Stipe versus Sergey for the vacant title and not the interim title.
Oh, you think they would do that? You think they would strip Jones?
I actually do, yeah.
If it's an injury, I don't see that happening. If it's injury, I just see a vacant title. I mean, a title fight. If
it's like a failed drug test, do you see it?
No. If it's a failed drug test and arrest of some sort, then I absolutely agree. Then they would vacate the title.
Okay. Yeah, it's this FYI. I would keep that in the back of your mind as a potential wild card if this main event does not happen as it's supposed to. So,
as I told you off the air, I feel like now the plan for December with no Conor versus Chandler is, and they even talked about it after the show on the pay-per-view broadcast. You got 3 fights. Oh, they only mentioned 2, but I say 3 because number 1, as I've talked about previously, you got to have the light heavyweight title be unvacant at some point. You got to have Jiri versus Pereira. Number 2, this fight here with Colby Covington versus Leon Edwards. And then number 3, of course, Sean O'Malley's first title defense. Like I told you off the air, I feel like 2 of those have to be for December. And then you take the remaining 1 to main event the first pay-per-view in January.
Okay, and I know we're jumping around cards, but now that this Conor Chandler fight is messed up, then what do you think the UFC is thinking for UFC 300? Then, considering that this is becoming a bit of a mess, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think they do?
Well, I mean, Zain, if you couldn't rely on Conor McGregor for UFC 200 because he had the whole thing when they were trying to make the Nate rematch, and you can't rely on Conor McGregor for an end of the year comeback for 2023, I don't know how you can rely on him for UFC 300, unfortunately.
I know.
I mean, UFC 300 would take place in the projection would be April. So,
Mhm.
I mean, do you hold out hope that maybe Conor McGregor gets? We talk about the 6 months with a potential USADA rejection. I mean, exemption rejection. Could you hold out hope that he re-enters the USADA pool by October 1st, so that way you can get it for UFC 300?
No, I think you have to start thinking backup plans immediately, considering what past history has told us. Yeah,
Do you hope then that O'Malley gets a quick win in his first title defense for him to headline UFC 300?
1000%. Yeah.
But you have to hope then it's not a war. If, say, he and Cheeto Vera have a big war for his first title defense that goes 5 rounds and they batter one another, he may not be
Yeah.
cleared in time.
Yeah, so you have to hope it's a quick win. You have to hope a lot of things go well, but I think if the UFC is smart, they're already looking ahead and thinking, UFC 300, Sean O'Malley, the main event would be massive. Yeah.
And if not him, I mean, do you have maybe the Islam Oliveira 2 winner on that card to defend the lightweight title?
I could see it, or you could see Hamza Chimaev challenging for a title on 300 also, which would
Oh,
be
I was thinking Israel. I was thinking Israel, but I mean, if Israel beats Strickland, then do you have, for the sake of 300, do you have Hamzat jump DDP for a title shot?
Mm, I don't know, because when it they want DDP versus Israel to be international though, that's the
I, Zan, my personal opinion is that the UFC screwed up by having Australia on such short notice, giving the Whitaker DDP winner, in this case DDP, not enough time for that quick turnaround. I feel like they owe it to DDP. And that's not just because I'm on the DDP hype train. I would have said the same thing about if Rob Whitaker couldn't make it to Australia in September.
my theory is that Israel versus DDP is going to take place at UFC 299. Assuming that Adesanya beats Strickland, that's my prediction. They're going to make the event before UFC 300, the DDP fight.
Okay, so then I'm going to throw one more wild card out there.
Okay.
Right before we start to talk about the Sean O'Malley fight. Uh, if it's the case then that you need a backup plan for UFC 300, and and O'Malley might be the person that you might want to protect at all costs, do you then not do 2 title fights in December? Do you just have Leon Colby in December, have, say, Yuri and Pereira in January, to kind of protect you know give all the chance in the world that O'Malley versus Vera could headline your UFC 300 card?
Yeah, I could very well see a scenario where the end of the year card is just one title fight.
And then hold O'Malley's first title defense, even though it would be a while from August to April. Maybe you gotta for the sake of 300 if you can't get Conor Chandler.
Yeah, and given what O'Malley does outside of the octagon, I'm sure he would be okay with about a 5-6 month break anyway. So, yeah.
And then if Conor Chandler does come to fruition, Conor does get in the pool by October 1st, then you have Conor versus Chandler plus a co-main event, which could be O'Malley versus Vera, which would be insane.
100%. I think any way that the UFC slices or dices at UFC 300 will be heavily debated in regards to how they did it once it's officially announced. It'll be very interesting.
Yeah, so a lot of questions with the UFC cards now as a result of Conor McGregor versus Michael Chandler being on.
This is a bit of an outlier, though. Do you think the winner of Grasso Shevchenko 2 could make a quick turnaround and be a co-main event for the end of the year card in December, or do you think that's not a possibility?
If either of them does, if the winner doesn't take too much damage, like if Shevchenko regains with like a first or second round domination, I could see it happening.
Mm-hmm. Just curious. It was one last final outlier that I had, considering I actually am looking at the card on my second screen right now to see what other fights they've added, and actually the card is near to complete, which I was very surprised about. But yeah, very, very healthy debate, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens over the next several months. Are you excited to talk about the UFC 292 main event now?
Yeah, let's just, we talked about O'Malley so much in the two news stories. Let's just jump right into it. The Sugar Show has officially arrived. He is the new UFC Bantamweight champion, second round TKO of one Aljamain Sterling. And Zan, the way UFC 292 was playing out with like the exciting prelims with the disappointing main card, Zan, I was thinking to myself after that first round, like it was going to be exactly what I thought it was going to be, in which Sterling would basically wrestle, to use the expletive term thrown around on social media, wrestle F word O'Malley into a unanimous decision. But then O'Malley, he clips him with a right hand in the second round, catches him coming in, and just wails on him with the ground and pounds. I know they were questioning the stoppage, but Sterling never protested it. He ate some decent shots on the ground. I thought it was a good stoppage. And, Zan, what else can I say? O'Malley proved me wrong. O'Malley proved me wrong. He is the champion, and all the best to him. I'm happy for him.
Yeah, I'm happy for him too. And I guess as much as it was a positive, it was a negative for you because it ruined a perfect pick card. You had,
fight. That was the one fight I got wrong.
it's probably and you've been picking fights for a while. Is that the best? Is that the best pick card you've ever had?
I think I had. I think this is actually the second time this year where I was one fight away from a perfect prediction.
That is absurd. But yeah, anyway, Sean O'Malley looked absolutely insane. He went out and did what he said he was going to do. Really, it's just it. I mean, he was literally super poised, composed, competitive, picked his shots well, found an opening, rocked Sterling in almost identical fashion to when Conor McGregor knocked out Jose Aldo. It was almost like the Matrix just came down and said, "Yeah, we're gonna duplicate this all over again," and that's literally what happened. And I thought it was cool. I thought it was interesting. I mean, I don't know if I've ever seen an arena cheer openly for someone that wasn't in that home region over the other guy, which is very interesting. It seemed to me like in Boston there was just more Sean O'Malley support than Sterling support. That card felt big. That card felt like it was a milestone event. It definitely seemed like to me the best Boston event that the UFC's ever put on in terms of an atmosphere, and it just looked insane on TV. I could not imagine what it was like in person.
I mean, the energy that Boston crowd gave off, Zan, you could compare to the time. I think it was January of 15 when McGregor fought Seaver in Boston.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that one was big because that was with Aldo in attendance and everything. But yeah, I mean, definitely Sean O'Malley winning is exactly, kind of what we alluded to last week. This is exactly what the UFC was looking for. They were looking for a highlight reel knockout. They were looking for a new star in the UFC bantamweight division. They were looking for flashy. They were looking for brash, flamboyant. O'Malley fits all of those adjectives, and I think, assuming he plays his cards right, I could see him be the champion for a while, and that certainly sets up a lot of exciting matchups. You have Marab in the mix. You have a Peter Yan rematch, which would be absolutely sick. You have the Sterling fight still out there. I mean, Sean O'Malley is going to have some very intense rivalries over the next 3 years, and he's going to be the most hated villain in the sport of MMA, and as well as the most beloved. I think he's going to be the new version of Notre Dame football. You either love Notre Dame football or you hate Notre Dame football, and I think he could become that heel that the UFC's been looking for the last several years. And just from an unbiased observer perspective, I mean, how could you not love it from a business standpoint? I mean, now you have a guy who loves to talk trash, has been very open in saying that, oh, I don't have a manager, I'm really my own businessman. Like, he's doing things that very few fighters have been able to do. And I think if he plays his cards right, he has the aura of, like, what Chuck Liddell was and what Conor was. And I mean, I really do think he could be that big star that makes, bantamweight one of the best divisions in the sport, and definitely, brought in a lot of new fans, probably a lot of fans that didn't really know, what the UFC was, but they knew who Sean O'Malley was. I mean, that guy's a brand on his own, and I think he's going to be making waves for the next several years, assuming he plays his cards right. It's going to be a very exciting title run, no matter if he loses in his first title defense or he defends the title for the next 3 or 4 years. I think it'll be very exciting.
For sure. And the reason we keep bringing up Cheeto, I mean, obviously Cheeto and Sean O'Malley have the history. Cheeto's the only one who has defeated O'Malley professional MMA, but I mean, as we kind of alluded to during our pre-show talk, they mentioned Sandhagen. We had said that he was going to be out for all of 2023 with the injury that he suffered a few weeks ago. But according to pay-per-view broadcast, it might be longer than that. It might stretch into even January, February, March of 24. So Sandhagen's going to be out of the picture for a little while. And they even mentioned Merab, which I didn't realize. Merab is heading into surgery. So we don't know how long Merab is going to be out of action for. So I guess Zan, at this point, I mean, depending on their recovery, because we talked about potentially O'Malley headlining UFC 300. I mean, potentially, maybe if Merab comes back and is ready to go for April, you could run that fight. Otherwise, maybe the UFC, especially if they want him to headline the December pay-per-view, UFC may not have any choice but to do the Cheeto rematch.
Yeah, which, by the way, I'm already thinking ahead because I'm insane. But could you imagine a scenario, Tom, where Marlon Vera beats Sean O'Malley in their fight, and then immediately turn right around, do Cheeto versus Sean O'Malley 2 in Rio de Janeiro? Meaning that Sean O'Malley will have to go to Marlon Vera's backyard to win back his UFC bantamweight title.
Oh, you mean 3? You mean 3, by the way.
Yeah, 3. But, well, 2 in this.
2 in terms of title fights, 3 in terms of
yes.
it's the Usman Leon thing.
Yes, 1000%. Yeah,
that would be really interesting though. I'm wondering if the commission would allow that kind of quick turnaround.
Well, no, I'm just wondering, what do you think an atmosphere in Brazil would be like for O'Malley to try to get? Assuming
he'd be booed out of the building.
That would be one of the most electric international atmospheres, arguably in UFC history. The scene there would just be ridiculous.
One last thing, by the way.
Go ahead.
Aljo, we talked about potential of him moving up to featherweight. I had said even if he had retained the title against O'Malley, I feel like Volkanovski would murder him at featherweight. And I mean, he even kind of recognized that. Volkanovski said he isn't interested in the fight because Sterling lost. I mean, what at this point is next for Sterling? Because featherweight's a no, right? You can't do that at featherweight.
No, you can't do featherweight. I honestly think he has to wait it out. I think he needs to wait it out for a potential rematch in the future. And he really has no one else left to fight. I mean, he's not going to fight Merab. And I think he's proved himself at bantamweight. He's beat all the best bantamweights in the world. I think Sterling can sit back and wait for as long as he needs to. To be quite frank, considering he's fought 1 to 2 times a year every year for about the last decade or so, and he's proved everything. So
I agree, especially because
I think he needs to play the waiting game and see how the rankings play out.
I agree, especially because we just talked about his body and his skills. Somebody like a Volkanovski would have his way, but I don't think he has the body to drop another 10 pounds and try a run at flyweight. I feel like he might have to play the waiting game.
1000%.
All right. Speaking of the lower weight classes, co-main event, Weili Zhang, Amanda Lemos. Zan. 200 and something strikes to like 21. It wasn't even close.
Yeah, I mean, this was an absurd domination. And I mean, it just goes to show that Whaley is just a freaking beast. I mean, her next fight, no matter who it's against, hoping that it is against Yao Xiaonan, which would be insane. Could you imagine those two in China? They would blow the roof off the place. But nonetheless, looked very, very good in their return, defended her strawweight title, really just had her way with Amanda from the second the fight started. I just don't think Lemos was prepared for, just Zayn just taking her down at will and just dominating her in literally every second of the fight. I think Lemos was probably expecting more of a striking clinic, and it didn't happen. I just think it was one of those things where just Zhang is such a dominant champion that I think Lemos may have underestimated how good she actually was, and it'll definitely be a learning experience for her. But I think it just goes to show that Zhang is a dominant strawweight and arguably the best strawweight ever. No disrespect to Rose or Carla or any of them, but early this performance is the best performance I've ever seen from her, and I think she's going to be holding the belt for quite some time. What do you think?
I do. I think that Weili is she is on another level. The fact that she had the two fights with Joanna running through her in the second fight, the beatdown that she put here, I think that she's going to potentially reign at strawweight, like you said, for a while. And Zan, I won't lie, I kind of am tempted to want to see Valentina regain the flyweight title, so that way somehow we can get that Weili Zhang versus Valentina fight, since we're never going to get Nunes Shevchenko 3.
Yeah, I mean, I think that fight that you just mentioned, I think is more likely now than maybe it would have been a couple years ago. I think if Valentina beats Grasso, Valentina can do whatever she wants, and this would be one badass super fight. And I think Dana would be all ears if the timing worked out perfectly.
For sure. All right, moving on with the rest of the card. Ian Gary. So we talked about domination, just flat out domination. A little disappointed he didn't get finished. I feel like there were opportunities, although Neil Magny is a really tough son of a gun. But yeah, Ian Gary, man, he's ready for the next level. He's ready for a top 10 opponent now.
Yeah, he's ready for the next level. He's ready for a top 10 opponent. Do you see a quick turnaround for Ian Gary? Do you see him competing on that MSG show, or do you think they're going to wait till early 2023 to really ease him in and give him the 3 or 4 fights that he's looking for? Because it's obvious that he's soaking up all of this knowledge. He's literally a sponge going all over the world to try to become the best fighter he can possibly be. Do you think they're going to keep him active, or do you think they're going to keep giving him strategic fights, to help build his name in the rankings? Obviously, Magny's a big win, but what do you think you do with Ian Gary from here? And I personally think it makes a UFC return to Ireland all that more likely in 24, and I could very well see him headline that card no matter who it ends up being against.
I'm not exactly 100% certain on what we could potentially do with Ian Gary, because I mean, the plan you mentioned, the plan for Ireland. Yeah, it should be 24, because he wants Gary on the Madison Square Garden card in November. So he needs a top 10 opponent, but he would need him in very quick fashion. The plan was, according to Dana, Wonderboy Thompson, and he says Thompson already rejected the fight. I don't know if I buy him, but also I understand from Thompson's perspective, if you're being linked to a potential fight with Kamaru Usman, you'd obviously want the Usman fight. So, I mean, above Gary now in the rankings, because Gary's now ranked number 11, you got Vicente Luque, Sean Brady, Jeff Neal, and then there's Wonderboy. Do you hope that somebody like Neal, I don't know the circumstances of Neal's injury, if he could be ready for November? Or, because I don't know, because the UFC wouldn't do Ian Gary versus Shavkat. They're not going to take two of their rising stars at welterweight and put them against one another.
No, but I think he and Sean Brady makes a lot of sense, though.
Yeah, Sean Brady is.
I mean,
again, I don't know the circumstances about Brady, though, if he'll be ready or not.
yeah, I mean, and if he's ready though, just stylistically, it's wrestler versus striker, and it would be it would be a phenomenal fight and a potential fight of the night candidate. But again, as you alluded to, with all of these injuries and with Thompson apparently not wanting the fight, Ian Gary will probably have to play the waiting game very similarly to Sterling and see what the heck happens. But for sure, there's no question about it that whoever Ian Gary fights next, whether it's at Madison Square Garden, whether it's in Las Vegas, whether it's in Ireland, every single fight from Ian Gary from here on out is going to be a massive fight, and one that I think for those who didn't know who Ian Gary was on Saturday night, they definitely know who he is now, and I think he's going to build even a bigger fan base, especially after what a dominant win he had against a guy that holds the record for the most wins in the UFC welterweight division, which is even more impressive.
Elsewhere on the main card, you got Mario Batista defeating Damon Blackshear. Good win for Batista. I guess we kind of still need to see a little more because, I mean, Damon Blackshear, hats off to him for the really quick turnaround. A literally days notice, just 1 week after his last fight. But, Batista, good win. Obviously, you would wish maybe the Garbrandt fight just for the name value. But, I mean, maybe another fight or two, Zan, we could talk about Mario Batista potentially being ready for the next level.
For sure. And I think it just goes to show that, if the Cody Garbrandt fight happens, how is he going to deal with someone, who is a former champion and really is the next level up in experience. So I think, not to say that Damon Blackshear was a consolation because Damon Blackshear is a tough guy in himself, but this is, a win where if you're a guy like Mario Batista, you beat a guy like Blackshear, you beat him on short notice, and I think his trajectory is only going to go up, and if he keeps performing in that way, with how dominant he was from the second the fight started until it ended, I think it's going to be interesting. I will say though, Tom, 100% that I think the 30-27 scorecard in this fight was ridiculous. I had Batista winning at least 2 of the rounds, but there's no way he won round 3.
It was 2-1. Blackshear won a round. You can't tell me Blackshear didn't win a round. Were you going to say round 3? I think it was.
I had Blackshear winning round 1. Yeah.
It was 1. Yeah, round 1 was Damon Blackshear's round. So I just no. It didn't make any sense, that scorecard. Nevertheless, they got the winner right. So
yeah, thank goodness. Otherwise, it probably would have been the biggest robbery of 2023. It would have been
one of the biggest robberies. Yeah,
it would have been disgusting. But yeah.
Speaking of Chito Vera, we mentioned him earlier, getting a win over Pedro Munoz. The fight, I mean, it was a good pace fight. Wasn't the most exciting, but I did feel like Chito was more effective with his strikes.
Oh yeah, I mean that's really all he needed to do, and it's just one of those wins where Chito needs to stay in that mix. I mean, obviously bantamweight is a bit of a mess right now, so this was a critical win for him. And of course, I don't know, you could probably tell me this. I don't know what Pedro Munoz's new ranking is now, but he's certainly going to still be in that mix moving into 2024, and certainly I think bantamweight is a lot to be excited about, even though the top half of the division is a little bit shaky at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. But like we said, I mean, Chito Vera has now put himself in the position with this win that, depending on what the circumstance of what the UFC goes from here, he might be next in line for the bantamweight title shot.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the prelims, Brad Tavares. I mean, it was I had goosebumps seeing Chris Weidman walk out to the octagon again with Tom Petty playing in the background. It was good to see. The leg kicks he took, though, were just absolutely brutal. It was like I got concerned that he was going to go down in a heap again. So, I mean, he fought a valiant fight. He went the distance, saw the final horn. He didn't get his hand raised. Like I said on social media, I think it's just a win in itself to see Chris Weidman make that walk and know again that he can do it. Nevertheless, with his losing streak, the injuries, I think it might be better I think this is where Dana's right in throwing the R word out there. I think he needs to retire.
Yeah, I think he needs to retire too. I mean, he's like 1-6 in his last 7 or something like that. Yeah, I think he needs to retire. It was definitely a good run. Very, very valiant and inspiring to see him come back in the way that he did. And to fight near his hometown was very cool. It didn't work out for him. Obviously, a nice win for Tavares, a veteran of the sport. He's been around a long time, but yeah, most certainly, I think Weidman needs to retire, and if he doesn't retire, he needs to consider taking a lesser opponent for his final fight in a fight that he actually feels he can win. But hopefully, that second option doesn't come to fruition because I think he needs to retire. Yeah.
Elsewhere, just because I know we're running short on time, but we talked about tough. We had the Tough Enough series. I want to give a shout out to Kurt Hallbaugh. Zain, just like the Lee Hammond fight, it seemed like he loses the first round, and then he comes back in just spectacular fashion, gets a submission in the second. I think it was a similar submission. I know the Hammond fight was it was a surprise arm triangle.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
Holloway just absolutely out of nowhere gets the submission, wins the lightweight tournament, and like I said, it's funny how Zain. I was interviewing him a few years ago during the COVID pandemic when he was preparing for his first fight outside of the UFC. Let's just clarify his second stint with the UFC, and now here he is back again, and he wins tough. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable, and it just goes to show that when you get second and third chances like that, you're going to succeed on one of them, and that's exactly what he did. And without a doubt, one of the most entertaining fights of the season, and a great way to cap off what we thought was going to be a bizarre finale. But the two rightful guys were there at the end, and congrats to Holloway, and I wish him all the success in his next UFC run. Although lightweight is not an easy division to go through, so it's probably going to take him a couple years to get to that upper echelon, the top 10, top 5 range. But he's back where he belongs, and it's very good to see.
And then in the other tough finale fight, Brad Katona has made history. He is the first ever two-time winner of tough. He and Cody Gibson, man, they were just, that was, I don't know if I can say like the comparison they made on the broadcast was to the Forrest Griffin Stephan Bonner fight. I don't know if I can put it to that level, but it was that kind of style of war. And I'm happy for Brad Katona making history. I hope it seemed like they were going to give Cody Gibson a contract as well. So hopefully that is the case.
Yeah, I hope that's the case too. And much respect to both of those guys. They'll both be inked in tough history forever. And hopefully we'll end up seeing a rematch down the line pretty soon when both of those guys are hopefully in contention for bantamweight title shots in a couple of years. But yeah, definitely a solid way to end the bantamweight portion of the show. And congrats to Katona making tough history and representing SPG Ireland once again. It's good to see, and for Gibson just leading his heart in the octagon was really, really cool. And it seems like he has a lot of support around him, and yeah, I'm sure his students are immensely proud of all the work he's been able to do. And maybe depending on if he starts winning a couple, maybe he devotes his full-time aspirations to MMA training. He hasn't hinted at it one way or another, but congrats to him. And I'm sure if he has a sports class at his school, that it'll be somehow weaved into it that Mr. Gibson, if you will, fought in one of the best fights in tough history. So it's also pretty cool to see.
Yeah, absolutely. There is that kind of aspect. I loved all the hearts. I love the viral, the video message that they gave to Cody, and that was just really absolutely heartwarming. And I hope my students give me that same kind of love. That's all I can say.
That's awesome. As they should.
Okay, pay-per-view outage concerns. Let's briefly make mention of this because there were a number of complaints of issues over social media where we had certain people, like in Canada, were only able, at one point they could only get a French feed, and then at some point I think there was an audio issue with the UFC Fight Pass feed. I had a fine feed throughout, Zain. I know some people also complain of ESPN Plus here in the US. My feed was fine. It did go out, though, during the walkouts for the main event, which made my heart drop dramatically. Like, wondering, I had to exit out of the ESPN Plus app. I went back in, and then it came back up with no worries. But it just on a night where you've got trying to make a big star like O'Malley. You can't have this happen.
Yeah, you can't have this happen, and it's bizarre because full disclosure, I was watching the same feed that you were, and I did not have those same issues. So when you sent me that, I'm like, wait, it didn't happen for me. But the most bizarre part of the story to me were the people that had uh, had took pictures of their TVs with the screen that always pops up that says "Thank you for your purchase." And apparently, according to one person that I saw, that exact screen was up there for 2 hours, and he missed literally over half of the pay-per-view. And in private messages with me and this person, he was hoping to get at least 60% of his refund back because of how much the event he missed. But yeah, when you have a big card like this and you're on ESPN Plus and you're several years into this deal, these things just can't happen, and they can't happen multiple times a year. And the weird part to me is that it only happens when the bigger UFCs occur, and not when the lesser UFCs occur with maybe just one title fight and one that isn't being as heavily promoted. So yeah, definitely a concern. Surprised no one asked Dana about it at the post fight presser, but hopefully this is something that can get rectified in the future. And to me, just an overall disappointment, especially for the people who paid. I can't imagine what it was like in bars. If bars had any issues, it didn't seem like they did. But yeah, just overall a very, very disappointing story, and a story you don't want to hear, especially on a night when Sean O'Malley is the big star and you want to try to push the bantamweight title fight as much as you can. So yeah, very disappointing story.
All right, very quickly, we're about to head into overtime. Just recap of the last PFL playoff card. Dennis Goltsov and Renan Ferrer will end up being your heavyweights final. Larissa Pacheco will be in the women's featherweight final, as we expected. Chance to become the first two-division champ in PFL history. But it won't be against Amber Leibrock. It'll be against Marina Maknikina, who just absolutely ran through Leibrock. So she was impressive. Larissa Pacheco got the fight done, and it was like a blink and you missed it. It was 14 seconds long.
Yeah, it was an absolutely absurd performance by her, and no surprise to see her make it to the finals. And Marina's gonna have her work cut out for her, that's for sure. And then Dennis Goldsov and Renan Ferreira is going to be an absolute firefight. I think that's the fight that I'm more so looking forward to seeing than the women's fight. I just know that heavyweight final is going to be all action, and there's no way that fight's go in the distance. That's for sure.
Yeah, no, that Goldsov versus Ferrer is going to be a banger. What did you think of the PFL? Like, they were showing Jon Jones in the corner, and they were showing the coaching when the knockout happened of Maurice Green.
I'm sure that if that was a UFC broadcast, UFC production would have gotten ridiculed for it. But because it's the PFL and because they're still building their overall audience, I think it's one of those things that production just has to take note of and know that you always have to stay on the action, especially when you're showing a vicious knockout to move into a final. If you're a viewer at home, you want to be able to see every angle you can. And seeing Jon Jones, who isn't even a part of the PFL and is the UFC heavyweight champion, just kind of made the situation a little bit more relevant. I know he has the relationship with Maurice Green, but still, it's not the main talking point. The main talking point is the finish, and I wish they would have highlighted that a little bit more.
This weekend, we got Max Holloway versus the Korean Zombie, Chansung Jung. And as we talked about prior to our recording, Max Holloway, very heavy favorite, as he should be. Korean Zombie obviously has been on a bit of a downturn. There's all the speculation that this could be his last fight, and that's why they made the fight with Holloway. And I mean, Sam, these are two of my favorites. These are two of my absolute favorites. It does stink that they have to fight one another, but at the same time, this is going to be an absolute banger. And I mean, Holloway is the kind of fight that both men deserve. Obviously, Holloway's proven that he can still go and still be at the top of the division, other than dealing with Volkanovski. And Korean Zombie, for all that he's done for lighter weight classes, namely for featherweight. I mean, I feel like this is the perfect last fight for him. Granted, it's probably going to end brutally with Holloway winning.
Yeah, in 45 seconds or less. Really brief breakdown of this fight. I just think Max Holloway's boxing is going to overpower the Korean Zombie. And I just think the Korean Zombie has been in so many wars over the years that I think as long as he can make this fight competitive with Holloway, that's really all you can really ask for. And I think to do it in Singapore is fitting, especially if this is the Korean Zombie's last fight. I see Max Holloway, a 4th-round TKO, and sending the legend out on his shield, and I think it'll be very entertaining.
Yeah,
But I will say this, for the early start time, this is not what you want if you're a hardcore UFC fan. So definitely, if people choose not to watch this card, it's totally understandable, just considering how early it is.
Yeah, no, with me with grad school finals, absolutely not. Absolutely not. I'm going to need all the sleep in the world. I will watch this fight in the afternoon once I am fully awake.
Fair, I'll probably end up doing this same thing, but yeah, I have Holloway in the 4th round. How do you have the fight?
I think I have Holloway in the 2nd.
Okay.
I think it's going to be a little earlier of a finish. Let's go over, by the way, tonight's PFL card. Obviously, if you're listening to us on Thursday, if you're listening to us at any point after the first day of this show comes out, we're putting this out on the morning of the PFL playoff, the second PFL playoff card in New York City. So we'll recap it the next time we are on the air. Let's talk about these fights. However, in the lightweight semifinals, you got Clay Collard, Shane Burgos, which is your main event. And your co-main event of the card is Olivier Aubin-Mercier, the defending lightweight champion, taking on Bruno Miranda.
Yeah, I mean, 2 high-level fights here. I see Shane Burgos beating Clay Collard in the absolute classic. I just think those two are going to go in there and start swinging. And then OAM, and you can never watch an OAM fight and tell me that it's boring. I see Bruno Miranda giving him a great fight, but I actually see OAM winning a decision over Miranda. So I actually will have Miranda and Burgos winning in these semifinals, and it's going to be those two in November for the finals. And I actually see Shane Burgos winning the PFL lightweight championship. So,
you see Bruno Miranda giving OAM his first PFL loss.
It could very well happen. Yeah.
I just think OAM has way too much talent in this division, so I'm going to pick him to get a decision over Miranda. Shane Burgos obviously coming in also with the controversy because Roush Mafia and Nathan Schultz both were disqualified as a result of their regular season fight. Shane Burgos didn't really impress me all that much, Sander, in the regular season, and I think he and Collard are going to produce an absolute banger. But I feel like Collard has just proven more with the PFL. I'm gonna go the opposite of you. I'm gonna go with a Collard OAM final, and
Okay.
I have OAM becoming a repeat champion.
Okay. Yeah, well, it'll definitely be interesting. But given my track record of upsets, I'm feeling pretty confident. So
I wouldn't be surprised. It's the PFL. There's a lot of upsets, and then we got the welterweight semifinals on this card as well to round things out for the semis. We got Sabatu C, the defending champ, taking on Carlos Leal. And then you got the number 1 seed, the former champion, the 2018 champ, the 2021 runner-up, Magomed Karamov, taking on Solomon Renfro. Magomed Umaladov has been injured, and so Solomon Renfro comes in on short notice to take this playoff fight.
Yeah, I mean, C versus Magomed is the fight. I mean, what more can I say? I think Renfro will give Magomed a great fight. I just think Magomed's wrestling is going to be too much, and then C is probably going to have another insane highlight reel knockout. So I'm just mentally preparing myself for that. But obviously, Wheel is very tough. That could go either way. But I just think experience in these two is going to play a factor, and I think you're going to see the 2 favorites advance to the championship. So.
Yeah. I agree. This one, I agree with you 100%. Sabatu C, I think he and Leal could produce a banger, but I think C just has more in the tank to produce an absolute classic, another classic viral stoppage. And Magomed versus Solomon San, I'm a little disappointed we're not getting the battle of the Magomeds. I think Umaladov could have given Magomed Karamov, a decent run for his money. But like you said, I think Magomed Karamov's wrestling is going to be too much. I see a C Magomed final, and I could see Magomed Karamov getting right back to the championship platform that he got 5 years ago.
Yeah, I could very well see that too, but nonetheless, these semifinals should be great. And I think whatever we get in November, is going to be nothing short of madness, considering how crazy these PFL playoffs have been. Before we get out of here, we just want to remind you to be sure to like and subscribe. Be sure to follow the show all across our social media platforms. Of course, the Empty the Bench Podcast Network at ETB Network, MMA Outsiders at MMA Outsiders ETB. I am Zain Bando. I'm a staff writer for BJPenn.com. You can find my work over there. You can also find my work as a member of the Bellator Rankings panel, which, who knows, Tom, maybe you and I will be partners at some point, assuming that the news comes out that we think is going to come out. And then, of course, Tom Albano to my left. You can find his work over at Fansided MMA, and be sure to tune into his work tonight for another edition of the PFL postseason over on PFL's website. So again, we thank you very much for tuning into another episode of the MMA Outsiders. This has been in episode 51. And of course, before we get out of here, before we tell you to enjoy the fights, we just want to remind you to be Joe Piper. And yeah, I have an outstanding weekend as we gear up for what will be a crazy fall.
Yeah. Be Joe Piper. By the way, programming note, housekeeping. Zain and I will be taking off next week, so there won't be an edition of the MMA Outsiders for next week as we prepare for, as we've already alluded to on the show, a very crazy autumn in this sport and in boxing. However, be on the lookout, because if that news about PFL and Bellator drops within the rest of this month that we think it's going to drop and has been teased of dropping at some point in August, Zain and I will do some form of live stream or video to discuss the news.
For sure. So stay tuned for that. The potential merger there, and be sure to keep it locked in on all of our social medias for all the latest happenings in the world of combat sports. So again, we thank you for joining us, and we will see you in 2 weeks for episode 52 of the MMA Outsiders.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.